Hi everyone, Matt here at CSU. So we've got another interview for you. Really excited about this one. So we're going to be speaking to Hannah Beko. She's a partner at GunnerCooke in Manchester, a law firm in Manchester, and also a coach and trainer specialising in mental health and well-being. So we're going to cover a lot of different stuff. I'm sure it'll be really interesting. And first up, I guess, Hannah, I'll get you to introduce yourself, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. It's great to talk to you this afternoon. So yes, I'm Hannah Beko. I'm a commercial property partner at GunnerCooke. I have been in commercial property for about 15 years now. So I would say, I suppose I ought to know what I'm doing after all that time. But I've been very fortunate that for the last 8 years, I've been self-employed at GunnerCooke, which has meant that I can follow my other passion, I suppose, which is my second business, Authentically Speaking. And it's through that I do my coaching and training, predominantly for lawyers and other professionals. And it all has a slant around the mental health and well-being idea. So although I train in other sort of behavioural skills and, the networking, the business development, the, finding your authentic voice and who you are, it all comes from the stance of how can people have better mental health and well-being, particularly in the law.
So it's really interesting because when we first met, we met about 6 months ago or something like that. And I was really interested at the time, given the work that you do around well-being and mental health in that particular industry around law, because I shared something with you at the time that I've obviously been working in the world of well-being for many years, and I've done very little work with law firms. It's always kind of they've said some of the right things, that they want to look at that aspect of things, but then haven't always followed that through. So I was delighted to see that there is a focus on that. So how do you see kind of well-being in that industry and how it links to things like performance?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I find it so interesting as well. And I fell into this by accident. I was about 3 years into my own business and I loved it. I'd always wanted to have my own business. I can see that now looking back. And I spent sort of 3 years just working hard, building that up. And then at the end of that time, looking back, know exactly what chronic stress looks like. And I know what working hard to build your business up or your reputation or your career or whatever it is does to your mental health and well-being. And so it was just through my own personal experience initially that I got to the point where I thought, I need to do something about this. I need to manage this in a better way. And I believe there is a better way to manage this that doesn't mean giving it all up or throwing it away or making a choice between my career and my health. There must be a way to make it work. And I did. I found that, fortunately, again, because I was self-employed, I could go off and spend time and money and learn about how to look after myself better. So it was purely from that perspective. But then I suddenly realized that this is a problem in our industry. It started off just being personal to me, but it's a huge problem in the industry. But even then, that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I found it very difficult to start talking to other lawyers and law firms about this issue. So I knew how important it was. And I knew anecdotally from talking to other lawyers that obviously I wasn't the only one who suffered with stress. But it was still very much a taboo subject, even 4 or 5 years ago. But
Why
it is
do you think that is?
Why? Obviously, there's many industries where mental health and well-being is taboo. I know the construction industry, for example, really, really struggles. So in one sense, yes, it is a very male-dominated industry still, but I think that's just historical, because I think men and women in law are struggling with mental health and well-being. It's not just a male or female thing. And my personal view is actually there's possibly more men struggling with it than there are women, but it's even harder to bring male lawyers to come and talk about it. I mean, they will come and talk about it with me, and some of my coaching clients are male lawyers as well, but in a more public place, they don't want to talk about it. But I think for law firms, there's been historically this idea that it's some sort of failure. If you admit that you're struggling with stress, then you can't cope with the job. There's the same sort of stories that, yes, they do still come out less, which is great, but they still come out, which is, well, yes, the job is stressful, just get on with it. It's part and parcel of the job. If you can't cope with it, then you're in the wrong career. And those things do still come out, but a lot less now. And I think that's because so many people have experienced it now, and the more forward-thinking firms know that probably everyone will. This is not a 1 in 4, in my opinion. This is a 1 in 1. Mental health affects everybody. We all have it. We all have physical health. We all have mental health. And at some point in our lives, work is going to be stressful and we're going to feel under pressure. And in combination, there could be something in our personal life. For me, what tipped over the edge was my dad was diagnosed with cancer. So I think, you're stressed at work and then it just takes something else to tip you over the edge. And I believe that will affect everybody at some point in their career. So as I say, forward-thinking firms know that and they're willing to do something about it. But historically, it's been very closed door, because it's just been very, either we don't have a problem here, or if we do, then that's the lawyer's fault because, they're in the wrong job.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So do you mind me asking about where because I as well, I haven't worked in the legal profession or the legal industry. I've worked a little bit on a consultancy basis, but not on a huge amount. But yeah, I've got that kind of preconception or that idea that it's very high pressured and potential for stress is there. Not that it's not there in other industries, but certainly legal kind of stands out for me for some reason. Why do you think that is? Is it long hours, or is it relationships, or where does it come from?
This is something I have been thinking about a lot over the last few months, because look at us compared to, all right, not right now in recent months, but look at us compared to doctors, look at us compared to the armed forces or the emergency services. Our lives are not put at risk. When we go to work in the legal business, our lives are not at risk. Yet statistically, we are more stressed out than all those other professions. Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, why on earth is that? And there's a lot of talk about, is it about the time recording system? If you're familiar with law, you'll know about this ridiculous 6-minute unit that we have. Whoever thought that idea up? I mean, it's I don't know. But, so we manage our time in 6-minute units, which in itself is very, very pressured. There's billing targets, there's time recording targets, utilization, write-off. It's traditionally been very competitive environment. And again, I'm pleased to see that is changing, because I don't think that does anybody any favors. But law firms are competitive, teams are competitive. I've worked in places where they even set lawyers in the same team against each other by saying, oh, look what they're achieving, can't you do better? So there's many reasons why law is stressful, or has been, and is called stressful in itself. But something that's really piqued my interest in the last few months is that I believe a certain sort of personality tends to be attracted to law, and that is your perfectionist personality, your people-pleasing personality. You never want to say no, you always want to say yes. You never put yourself first. It's always about your client, your firm, getting that piece of work done. And believe me, I've done this before, and that's what nearly brought me to burnout, because I said yes to everything, and when the client wanted it, they got it. I never said that's not achievable in this time frame, or I'm not going to be able to do that tonight, or no, I can't do a telecon at 10 o'clock tonight. I always said yes. And I think these personality traits are drawn to law. We tend to become lawyers. And also law firms select for those, when they're interviewing people, they will see those traits. That's what they'll want. Yeah. But those traits in themselves are going to lend themselves to mental health issues and burnout, unless we learn to almost control those traits and to start caring about ourselves and not just saying yes to everything.
That is interesting. I think you've got the title for your PhD if you ever want to do one. that is a good theory, and people being drawn towards it. And I guess if you put them into a certain culture as well, which kind of heightens those traits, then it's a perfect storm, really, isn't it? So would you say, and this isn't where we were going to go with the conversation, but would you say there's a lack of diversity in that industry? And I don't just mean diversity in the sense of race or gender necessarily, but I mean in terms of thinking, neurodiversity.
Yes. I mean, yes to all the lack of diversities that you just mentioned there, which is a whole other conversation. Of course it is. Neurodiversity is extremely interesting, and actually I was just at a talk with somebody at lunchtime about that, which was fascinating. But Yes, I think traditionally law firms have selected for the same sorts of personalities and the same sorts of people. That there's the saying, isn't there, that when you're interviewing, you unconsciously, probably sometimes consciously, you're going to select people who are like you. So if you've got the people interviewing, they're going to look for people with the same sorts of traits as them. And they probably even had a tick box, they might not have called it perfectionist, but they'll have had something that looked like that. Attention to detail, perhaps they called it, or something like that. So yes, I'm sure that law firms were only selecting for those sorts of characteristics. But when I talk to my husband about this a lot, because he's a lawyer as well, so we have very interesting conversations about these things. But when you look at those lawyers sometimes that really do stand out, when you look back at your career and think they were a great manager or they were a great partner, or you can see that they're doing really great things now, often they are different.
Okay.
They have characteristics that stand out from other people. And that's why it's one of my favorite things to train on, and something I'm really passionate about is encouraging both young lawyers and older ones to look at who they are and what their personality is and bring more of that into work instead of what they think they should be bringing. Because actually, not only is it better for them, healthier, better for their mental health, but they will stand out from others. Because if we're all the same and we all act the same and look the same and talk the same and think the same, how are we ever going to differentiate ourselves? One property lawyer is the same as another property lawyer unless you use your personality to stand out. So I do think, and law firms are really starting to cotton on to this idea that they are businesses. We're not a standalone industry anymore. We're a service industry. And we need to look for people who demonstrate these other traits, better leadership, things like that, more entrepreneurial, better at going out and getting clients and building those relationships. And there's some great traits that you wouldn't traditionally think of being associated with lawyers that are really good for those roles.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's really interesting. Like I say, that's probably a whole conversation in itself, isn't it, all around that side of things? But yeah. But it links back into well-being, mental health, and all that side of things, because it's how people are thinking and how they're feeling as well. But we've got to address the elephant in the room, as all these conversations tend to be at the moment, the coronavirus and the crisis that we've got going on at the moment. So, what do you think, or what do you know, the impact of that has been within the industry, and how are you seeing that?
This is going to be fascinating, actually, to follow what this does to the legal industry, to many others as well, I'm sure. And I was just thinking about this before we started speaking. So traditionally, we have been told that our role can't be done remotely, can't be done at home. We can't service the clients that way. You can't work in a team that way. Now, I know that's not true, because for 8 years I've done the role I do, and I have done that as part of a team, working nationally with people, and it can be done from home. You do need to have a decent printer and a decent scanner and a decent IT setup. I know that. But once you've got that, our job can definitely be done from home. But most of the industry didn't know that before lockdown. So I was even talking to a lawyer on the other side of a transaction about a week before lockdown, and he said to me, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I can't do my job from home. And I didn't want to say, well, actually you can, because I do your job and I do it from home. So it is perfectly, doable from home. But that's going to be the big sea change, I think, because particularly for women who were coming back from maternity leave or wanted to change their arrangements for more flexibility, more remote working because of childcare issues, they were told very frequently that wasn't possible because it just couldn't be provided for within the work that they did. And 10 years ago, when I took my first maternity leave, that was very much what I was being told. And now, yes, there are firms that have started to see that this really does work, and that's great for them. And they were the ones who were really ready for lockdown, because they had the IT systems. They were ready for people to just pick up their laptop and work from home, and it wasn't a big emergency for them. Whereas obviously there were others that needed to get all the IT set up, and that's still not in place for some people. But going forward, they are not going to be able to deny people more flexible and remote working, because they cannot say that it doesn't work. They cannot say we can't service the clients, you can't be part of a team, this work can't be done at home, because we've all proved now that it can. So that will be one very big difference, will be just that I think those, and I don't just mean mums, it could be dads as well, or it could be people without children who just want to work from home more because they don't want to waste so much time on the commute, and they maybe want to be home in time for tea, or maybe they want to take up cycling or running or whatever it is. Pick up the guitar again. People will realize that they can have so much more time if they're at home a bit more and not commuting into the office.
Yeah.
And also, anecdotally, we've seen that productivity is a lot higher in lockdown. Now, I have concerns about that because I think people are working very, very hard because they're worried about their position, because there's talk of redundancies and what's happening in the market. And also, I know people are struggling with having kids at home and homeschooling. It's not the ideal environment at all, but yet we've done it. We've done it. And so when we come out of this in 6, 12, 18 months time, whenever we go back to normal, then when we're not homeschooling anymore and we're not trying to share the desk with our other half, then imagine how much more productive people are going to be then. So I think the industry is going to have to change in terms of flexible working, remote working, things like that. And the other big change, linking back to mental health and well-being, is that people have suddenly seen what life could be like. They've seen what the other side of life that I've been trying to get them to see for years, which is your career does not have to define you. It doesn't have to be all there is. You can have your career and be good at your job, but you can still be at home. You can have tea with your kids. You could, play football with them. You could help them with their studies. You can drop them off at school and go to the assemblies or watch them in their swim class or whatever it is, and still have a career and still have a job. And that, I hope, will be the big individual change that people make coming out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder whether there'll be an autonomy bit in there as well, because one of the things you mentioned is the causes of stress was these 6-minute time, the clocking your time. And whilst I'm guessing that still exists when people are working remotely, there's perhaps a little more autonomy associated with the fact that, you're in your own surroundings and you can, rather than, I've always found it weird that at some point someone decided that we should all go into the center of a city and go to a big building and go and sit together. and that probably, serves a really good purpose, and it obviously worked for many years. But with technology as it is now, that's starting to seem a little outdated, in the same way that people working in mills and all the rest of it from the turn of the 1900s seems outdated to us now. I wonder whether those things will just fundamentally change as a result of what's gone on. I don't know.
I think you're right. I mean, I often say the way we work now came from the industrial age. Even the 6-minute unit and the way that we charge our time out by the hour and things like that, that treats us as machines. It's like, how much can you produce in 1 hour or in one day? Well, we're not machines, and on some days when perhaps you've had a better sleep and you've drunk enough water and maybe you've got some fresh air, you might be so productive that day and get through so much work and good quality work. Whereas another day, you might not get through so much good quality work. But to try and assume that we are uniform and we will do exactly the same thing every day, I think definitely goes back to the industrial age. But yes, the whole us all going into the city centre at the same time as the schools start as well, and as the restaurants open. I mean, my friend is Greek and she always thought it was crazy. She said, why do you do all the same thing at exactly the same time? So therefore you spend, what for me would be a 45-minute car journey into Manchester takes an hour and a half to 2 hours if we go at normal peak times. I mean, I can get out of the London office on the train back to my house quicker than I can get out of the Manchester office and drive home sometimes. It's crazy. But yes, I think people will commute less, which will be brilliant because they'll have more time at home. Which is good for the environment because they're not going to be commuting so much. No, we won't need so much office space. That will be something else. So yes, I think there'll be big changes.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you've talked a lot about kind of well-being in the industry, and it sounds like obviously you work in the industry, so there are positive strides being made, and you've spoken to me before about how you work with other law firms who are interested in pursuing this area. So well-being's obviously on the agenda, or getting on the agenda. Do you think it's on there enough? How do you think it's getting on?
I sound a bit mean sometimes, so I have to caveat this with 3-4 years ago, it was not on the agenda at all, and it was not being talked about, with perhaps a few rare examples of great firms, I'm sure. But on the whole, 3-4 years ago, you could not talk about stress and you could not talk about well-being to law firms. So yes, I know that all the talk is about the fact that well-being is now on the agenda. You know, you'll see that headline very often in lots of legal press. And to a large extent, they're right. You know, not with all firms. There are some firms where it's on no agenda at all.
Mhm.
But for the bigger ones and for those that are more forward thinking, yes, it's on the agenda. But my concern is that, so yes, you know, almost I sort of give them brownie points for that. But it's still touching the surface. It's still the fruit bowls and it's the yoga at lunchtime. Maybe they have someone come in and give massages. You know, there's these sorts of initiatives which are a start. They're a step in the right direction. But I've been speaking a lot to people recently, trying to understand what's the take up with these sorts of initiatives? How many people are actually taking part in them? And what's the return on investment? You know, what are you getting out of this? Are you seeing reduced sickness and absence? Are you seeing improved productivity? Are you seeing less people leaving, moving on? Are you seeing more people sort of putting themselves forward for internal promotions and things like that? And all resoundingly so far, everyone is telling me we don't know because we're not measuring any of this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I feel as though they're putting things in place to tick a box to say that we've cared about our staff's well-being, but I'm not sure it's producing any or many results yet, and that's my concern. And then, of course, the next question is, well, why not, and what needs to be done about it? And I'm writing about this at the moment. And the biggest things that seem to be coming back are management buy-in. So the biggest barriers to improving well-being in law is stigma, which has been historically there. And yes, putting these initiatives in place helps to some extent to bring down that stigma. But when nobody's going to them, that shows that some of the stigma is still there because people don't want to be seen to be going to these initiatives. And I'll add particularly men. A lot of these initiatives only women tend to go to. Women organise them, women tend to go to them. But if management don't buy into it, and yes, the board level needs to buy into it, but the everyday managers do. So I see these firms who say, well, I've put on a wellbeing session or a, you know, mindfulness session or yoga, and the juniors are sat at their desk knowing that this session is on, but their boss is sat there working away.
Yeah.
So they're not feeling comfortable enough to get up and go to those sessions because they're thinking, well, the boss is prioritizing work over this well-being session, so I should do that too. So until we start to see the bosses prioritizing well-being, then I don't think that the employees are going to. And the reason I would like them to prioritize well-being is not just for the fluffy reason that yes, it's a good thing to do, which of course it is. You know, it's good to care about the health of your staff, but to me, healthy, happy staff are more productive. So, you know, it comes back to the bottom line.
It'll be interesting to see what impact it has during something like this crisis as well, because something that I saw identified during the financial crisis, in particular working with some of the big banks through that period, was those ones who did look after their staff before, during, and after. And again, this is fairly anecdotal, but there is some evidence to back it up. They tended to outperform. You know, one of the things that I saw, and I saw this with clients I was working with at the time, was there was a bit of a rush for the exits from some of the firms who hadn't looked after the well-being of their staff during that difficult period. So during the period, they stayed because, as you've said before, they're worried about their jobs. The job security keeps them there. They don't see they've got any other option. But as soon as that starts opening up again, they say, well, maybe I want to go and work for someone else who's actually going to look after me when something like this happens. So, yeah, I wonder whether we'll see a similar thing to not just the law industry, to several other industries that we talked about. As a result of what's going on. The analogy we use, I love that you talked about that. The analogy we use is that well-being shouldn't be the sprinkles on top of a cake. You need to bake it in to the cake. You know, it needs to be fundamental. You don't just put it on at the end. Put an apple on someone's desk, and I've done well-being. But but yeah. I've seen that in plenty of industries, plenty of organisations. Don't worry. Yeah. So the final one, I guess, just with 5 minutes remaining, is what's the solution to it? How do we solve this problem? That's an easy question, right?
Do you know, in some ways for me it is an easy question. Well, it's an easy answer for me to articulate. It's not so easy for people to put it into practice. There is a huge it's a combination of the two things. It's a combination of the organization themselves genuinely caring about well-being, and like you said, it not just being the icing on the cake. It's got to be the fundamental, we're going to look after our people for the fluffy reason and for the business continuity reason and productivity and all those sorts of things. But it also comes to the individual, particularly in our industry. We're lawyers, we're bright people. We should be able to make decisions for ourselves and think about what's right for our life, for our health, for our future, for our families, whatever it is. And what I really want to see, and maybe lockdown will help with this, is people starting to take more responsibility for their own happiness, which sounds really twee, doesn't it? But it's what I've been talking about for years to people. When you start caring about yourself being happy, you start looking at, well, okay, what am I spending my time doing? Where's my focus going? What is it giving me back? And that's where that correlation you mentioned with, those banking organizations that did look after people. Because if you're in an organization that's looking after you, then you're going to feel naturally that you want to stay there, you want to progress, you want to do well for them. Whereas if you start to feel, which certainly did happen in a lot of law firms in the 2008, 2009, well, you don't care about me. I'm just a number, I'm just an employee number. I'm replaceable. And those sorts of words were used in 2008, 2009. Then you have no loyalty to that place anymore. So it's about your life, your family. So I do think it would be great to see people start to care about themselves more. And I don't mean that in a sort of selfish way or anything. We should all look after ourselves. We've got families to be there for. We're role models to people, whether we work with junior lawyers, underneath us, what they see us do is what they will follow. So if we want them to be healthier, we should be healthier. So I do think the individual does have to start taking more responsibility for their health and well-being, and then demanding it from the organizations that they work with.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this will just change generationally, because I know that the numbers are showing that people are, when they join organizations, they're interested in what well-being provision there is, and they're not just after the what's my salary or whatever it may be. The one thing I've thought about, and this isn't just in the legal profession, but professions like that are quite kind of prestigious, I guess. You do a lot of study to get to the point of working for one of these organizations, and also the remuneration's quite, stereotypically you expect to get paid more money working for one of those firms. Rather, I don't know if that's true in real life, but there is other industries where you don't go in it for the money, whereas I think there will be people who go into that industry for that reason. Do you think that, what's the best way to articulate this? It's because it's such a popular and prestigious industry. Do you think there's a risk, because there's such a groundswell of graduates wanting the jobs, that, well, if you're going to worry about your mental health and well-being and not going to fit into the cookie cutter version of what we're looking for, well, we'll just get someone else who will, and they'll always be there. And some other industries don't have that. They can't choose because there's not that many people who want those jobs. You think about I guess nursing, for example, is not nearly the numbers going into that profession that there once were. So it's not that they have to take what they can. That's coming out wrong, but you know what I mean. You've got less choice, whereas law, from my perspective, seems like there'd be lots of choice. So just choose the ones who fit with what you do already. Is that fair, or is that not fair, or what do you think?
I think that has been true. I think historically that's definitely been true. Yes, because there were a lot of people. There's been, law's a very popular profession. There's been lots of people coming in. But I'm seeing big changes with the future law students. So I know a few interesting, they're male students actually coming through who are, some are about to start their training contracts, some are coming up soon. and they are very vocal about the whole mental health and well-being situation, about their own past issues, about what they want to see in the future in the profession. So I think, if anything, those coming up through the ranks are going to demand this even more than people are who are there now. So I do think firms have got to address it. I also think it's those who are forward thinking will see that it's worth addressing anyway, because it's not just that it's the right thing to do, but when people get any sort of help or support with these issues, they're much better. They're much better at their job. They're much better with clients. It's just, I mean, I almost without exception, I can't think of any exception, all those people I've spoken to who are honest enough to say I have struggled with depression, anxiety, chronic stress, anything like that, and found ways to deal with it and to make it work, are better as a result at their job and in their lives. Whereas those who never address it are the ones who unfortunately do end up, with quite serious problems and are off work for a long time and things. So I actually think it's a positive to address any of these things, and actually does help people to perform better too. And I do think those new ones that I see coming up through the ranks know this. They're talking about it, they're vocal about it, and they're going to change the system coming in that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an incredibly powerful message to finish on, really. Whilst I'd love to keep talking to you forever, I'm sure, yeah, I've got loads more questions for you. Maybe we could do another conversation at some point, but really powerful message to finish on, this idea that, mental health, it's not a weakness. It's just part of who we are. And those people who are more aware of that, more open, honest, transparent, actually, you said they outperform those who perhaps bury it away. So yeah, amazing, great. Thank you very much for speaking to me for today. Like I said, I'd love to ask you more questions, but it's been really insightful, some of the things that you mentioned. We'll have to do this again at some point. And yes, the only other thing I should say, which I always forget, by the way, is to like and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed the conversation today, and if you want to catch the next one that Hannah will do for me, which we've not talked about, but she's nodding, yeah. maybe.
Yeah, of course.
So like and subscribe to the channel so you keep abreast of that, and let us know in the comments what you think, particularly if you work in the law industry. We'd love to hear from you, what you thought of some of the topics that we've talked about today. So thanks very much, Hannah, really appreciate it.
Very welcome.